Good morning, everyone. Hope all of you are doing good. Welcome to the session on overhead cost. I believe you guys have got some time to do some practice on what we have covered till now. Last week around, we had interactive sessions on material cost, labor cost, and I remember the first time we had discussed with respect to inclusion in the cost was for any product cost for the components like material, labor, and overhead. Right. So before we talk about the details, just want to check with everyone here who have joined. What do you think overhead would consist of? Just starting the session with a question for all of you. What do you think the overhead or overhead expenses would consist of? Let's see who answers first in the query panel or in the Zoom here. We discussed direct material. We just discussed direct labor. Something else that could be clubbed under overheads. Guys. So while we wait for response, I would like to also talk about how we are progressing towards today's session. Is not only we will be talking about the inclusion, do we include the overhead cost? That would be very, very important. How does the overhead end up into a product cost, or what all overheads need to be included at first? And then we will be discussing the comparison, like, between today's session and the next session on Thursday, which is activity-based costing, would be a very much kind of a I would say, interlinked session because what learning we'll be having today in terms of the absorption of the overhead into the production cost and how that can be improved upon with other systems of costing. So that is what will be very, very interesting to kind of combine and interpret. So I got the first response from Khushi here. Khushi says indirect material, indirect labor, and expenses. That is an excellent answer. So when we talk about the components of the material cost, guys, or other a total product cost, we talk about the direct material, we talk about direct labor, and we talk about overhead. And when we talk about the overheads, they themselves talk about the indirect material, indirect labor, and the expenses, or I can say utilities, right? So so what happens here is that we will be discussing what are the various types of overheads. As you can see, a production or the factory overheads, we also call them as the factory overheads. We'll then talk about general and administrative overheads, selling and distribution overheads. How do we take into account of these overheads? Now, why this is important to keep a check on the overheads? Of course, there are various answers. Remember our three E's from the material and labor perspective. We talk about economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And also from a overall ultimate objective, when we talk about pricing of a particular product, it is very imperative that all the costs actually land up into the product which are required to be. Otherwise, you'll not be able to price the product properly, right? So we'll be talking about different types of overheads and how those overheads are absorbed within the product cost. So to start with, guys, the first aspect I would like to talk about is how do we classify these overheads? When I'm saying that, okay, this is a production overhead, this is administrative overhead, or selling and distribution overhead. I remember, a lot of things we have learned in our earlier accounting days uh, was whatever cost incurred, right? And I remember the difference we all learned in accounting was a very small difference in the term called wages and salaries, right? We all learned that okay, the factory workers get the wages and the back end guys, the other the corporate office guys get salaries. Those are the terms we used to learn in our early days. And the wages are anyways being talked about in direct labor. So that means, are we talking about any other thing in overheads? Are we saying that there is no expenses in the factory which doesn't get overhead? Of course not. There are indirect material, there are indirect labor, there could be utilities like the factory rent. We talk about the depreciation, electricity, fuel, all that is kind of part of the production overheads. Whereas if I talk about corporate office expenses, including the salary or depreciation of the office equipment, that gets landed up into the administrative overheads. And further, selling and distribution, as the name suggests, expenses incurred on advertisement, on the survey, on or ensuring or promoting the sales gets included into selling and distribution. But are all of these overheads included in the product cost or not? That we will see. So first, let's understand how do we classify these overheads. So there are various parameters on the basis of which we can do this classification. First is of course by function, as I was explaining, in terms of the indirect cost, which is incurred in the factory. We are also calling it as a factory overhead, manufacturing overhead. Uh, that is another term, manufacturing overhead. And there are various examples, guys. We already have known or talked about indirect labor, indirect material, but when it comes to depreciation of the factory, equipment or factory building or any insurance of the factory assets, all that gets clubbed under the manufacturing overhead here. Whereas in terms of the general administrative overhead, they're more related to the office or the corporate expenses in terms of whatever the repair and maintenance or the salaries to the staff working there or depreciation on the office equipment. Now, they are again general and administrative expenses, more or less, they are related to the direction involved in the organization, not directly related to the production though, or they are neither related to the sales activities. So something which is happening at the back end, that is something, it's an administrative overhead. Whereas selling and distribution directly relates to the selling activities. So we're talking about selling, distribution. So what is selling here? Any expenses with respect to promoting the sales. We talk about the sales commission, we talk about the advertisement cost, but distribution overhead is more with respect to making the product available, expenses on the distribution channel, like, we talk about the transport expenses, the delivery expenses or any transit insurances, all those come under that aspect. That is just one way of looking at these overheads, guys. So apart from by function, we can also classify these overheads with respect to the fixed, variable, and semi-variable. So when I talk about by nature here, I talk about fixed, variable, or semi-variable. We are talking about how these expenses behave with respect to changes in volume. That's the question here. So we're looking at by nature. That means we're saying that okay, if certain costs are kind of fixed as an amount for certain period, uh, up to a particular volume that doesn't change within that range. Let's say up to a production of 1 lakh units, these expenses are not going to change. That's fixed overhead. So let's say so any examples, guys? Fixed overhead. Would like to give any examples of fixed overhead here? Expense would not change with the changes in volume up to a particular limit. Any examples, guys? Let's see who answers first for this one. I'm assuming more people have joined in by now. Yes, of course, we're talking about one of the examples we already discussed. So answers coming in from Kiran, Shisha, rent. Common example coming is a rent here. Okay. So we're saying that, okay, irrespective the production happens or not, we are paying rent. That's perfect. What about the salaries? We have committed to them. What about the depreciations? All that is a fixed overhead, guys. There is something which varies with the volume, right? That is, we are calling it as a variable overhead. And that's where the role of something like indirect materials or any utilities like lubricants, all that comes into the picture because that varies with respect to, okay. So one is, Trisha is giving me an answer with respect to the power. Uh, that's an interesting example though, but Trisha, I would like to talk about the way these utility bills are kind of raised by the departments. I would call power or electricity as something called a semi-variable. What is semi-variable? If there is some amount of fixed component involved, like irrespective of the production levels, there is some minimum level that will be charged, and then there will be a variable component which will be getting impacted by the volume. So most of these utilities, like electricity or water, I would say they are kind of even in some cases your telephone or networking expenses, depending on the plans you opt for, could be semi-variable. But anyways, that was a good example though. By element, we have already talked about. element we have already discussed in terms of the coverage of how do we classify the overheads as in terms of whatever goes into the indirect material. Remember, we discussed this in the material session. That's something which is not directly related to production of only specific one product, but which are used for for multiple products. The classic example could be any stores, lubricants, or any tools. So again, which are more of consumables. So we are looking at from perspective of indirect materials. Whereas indirect, labor or indirect employee cost, just again, a person not directly involved in the production of a particular product, but let's say, a salary to a uh, lift foreman or a supervisor on the factory, all that gets into the indirect, labor. And indirect expenses is all the expenses which are like we are talking about, mind you, here in terms of not classifying for factory, general administrative, it could be any indirect expense here. Depends on how we are classifying. From an organization perspective, from a strategic management perspective, I would say one important classification methodology is also by control here. And when I say by control, we are looking at a controllable and uncontrollable cost. The name itself tells us an important aspect. We say that, okay, the cost which probably can be influenced, can be controlled by the management policies that are, of course, controllable costs. If they can, so I think the biggest example would be the wages and the salaries over there, right? uh, Depending on what type of organization structure particular company has, what type of staffing they want to have. Uncontrollable is something which is beyond the control and may not be directly impacted by the managerial policies. Something like rates and taxes, something like depreciation, because that depreciation relates to the sunk cost which is already incurred. So, anyways, this is something good for a very very important understanding for you guys, that okay, how in different ways we can look at the classification of the overheads. And I'm assuming that you guys understand that why it is important for us to know these classifications. I think biggest answer would be the last part from a managerial perspective for controlling these expenses. Not only that, even for decision making like budgeting, that is where these classification can help us, because simply think about like a fixed overhead and a variable overhead. If we know the classification between the fixed and variable overhead, it helps us to make not only the draft only the master budget, but also the flexible budget, as in the expenses, how the expenses shall behave at different levels of output. So that becomes very important over there. Now, uh, I was talking about guys in terms of why these counting for the overhead becomes important is because they need to be involved into the product pricing, yes or no? What do you think, friends? Do you think that the overhead cost should actually be considered for the product pricing ultimately? I think answer should be yes. We are talking about the total cost plus the margin that tells us the overall pricing. So, how does a particular, let's take an example, guys. Let's say a company is into manufacturing of six different products, and they're incurring a lot of these overheads. How do we know? How do we know, or what will be the mechanism to charge these overheads for each of that product cost? Should I just add up all the overheads, divide by six, allocate them depending on the volume or whatever? Should that be a random allocation, or should there be a mechanism here, guys? I think the obvious answer is that you have to follow a rational or a logical mechanism in terms of how these overheads get absorbed in the product cost. So let's look at the overall cycle in terms of how do we do this. We are basically now moving into a traditional way of or the traditional steps of how these overheads are accounted for. So, and initially we'll be discussing, guys, of for manufacturing overheads. So initial discussion will be around factory overheads. Later on, I will touch base upon the administrative and the selling and distribution as well. So this is a very, very important, I would say, steps in terms of how do we account for these. First one is estimation of overheads itself. Now, why this is important? When I say that estimation of the overheads, someone may ask that, okay, do we need to estimate in advance, or do we need to wait as and when the expenses are incurred? Now, the problem is that a lot of things are time bound, right? So getting some answers on the query panel, very nice. Answer coming in from Kiran, a mechanism has to be followed, and that's what we are now discussing in terms of what could be the right approach. So as I said, are we waiting for the actual expenses to be incurred, or can we preempt? Can we estimate something in advance and take into account for that provision for overhead expenses? And as I said that there are a lot of activities, including reporting, monthly deadlines. We have everything time bound these days in terms of the statutory filing requirements and everything else. It's important that we kind of report everything on time, and we really cannot leave everything at the end that okay, once everything has happened and then we start accounting for that. So for overhead specifically, guys, it's very important that we understand, we estimate the overheads in advance, and we can keep into accounting based on our estimates. And later on, towards the end, when we have actual overheads and actual expenses, we can take care of the difference. And we'll talk about towards the end. That's something called as a under absorption or over absorption. But overall, in terms of the first step, we'll talk about estimation here. When I say estimation, how do we estimate, guys? How do we estimate? So you can see by standing orders or through budgeting process, but there has to be even a mechanism for budgeting process. Maybe past year numbers. Past year numbers could be good enough, like whatever the expenses in the previous years. When I talk about the standing orders, what is a standing order? Wherein we are looking at overall approval mechanism has allotted some expenses for different areas. So these are the areas where we can use specifically. I think the most important point is the previous years or the budgets here. So we have to, or even there could be a situation where you are planning a different capacity level this year, and hence the classification of the overheads into fixed and variable becomes very important, because your estimate in the current year can be different from the previous year if you are planning to operate on a different volumes here, right? So we have to start with estimate, and we will progress on including the expenses based on the estimate. Then we'll take into account the difference later on. But so first we estimate the overheads, guys. Now, as I said, there are six products in my example in the company. Think about any kind of home appliances. We're talking about washing machines, air conditioner. We're talking about refrigerator, right? Televisions. So if there are six products, how does respective cost end up into each of these six products? Now, for all these expenses, guys, first we have to see, are there specific expenses which are related to particular department? And there is a term in costing we use, guys, cost center, right? Let's say we make different cost centers to accumulate the cost incurred in that department. So let's say I talk about six products. Can I make one product as a cost center? Whatever expense is being incurred for a production of a TV, can I include that in that cost center? So that could be one ways of controlling the cost. And I will talk about these cost centers in Thursday session as well, when we talk about another type of costing mechanism. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of these expenses could be related to specific department. Think about departments like, assembly, cutting, molding. So are we saying that, okay, these are different departments or these are different functions? Can we allocate these expenses to respective, departments over there? Or uh, is there a way can I actually, you know, ensure if any overhead expense which is common for different departments, can I allocate that as well? That is my next two steps, guys. The next two steps we are talking about. Allocation. When I say that if we are saying many production processes are performed in different departments, we can allocate that directly. That can be allocated directly. That's a simple game. Now, when I say directly, guys, of course, that is also important from a control perspective. And when we say that certain expenses that could be incurred overall for a particular company, like you guys gave me an example of a rent, right? So rent is being paid for the entire building, right? Entire factory building, we are paying the rent. If I'm paying the factory rent for the entire building, how do I allocate the rent to different departments in the factory? Let's say there are different departments. How do I allocate the rent? The biggest answer would be that I need to determine a basis of apportionment here. And I need to understand. So if I'm saying that, okay, initially you estimate overheads here, then any expense which are directly attributable, get that, get rid of that, allocate that directly. But the point is the remaining, the balance, which could not be directly allocated, that needs to be portioned somehow to different departments. And that is where, my friends, you need to be careful in the terminology. Allocation means direct allotment here. Apportionment means you are dividing it. Now, as I said, you need to get some kind of a mechanism how these overheads can be, apportioned here. So we have to identify a mechanism that can establish a cause and effect relationship. That can establish a cause and effect relationship. Like the example I talk about rent. So can I think of a mechanism that how do I apportion the rent? Let's say there is a floor area being occupied by different departments. uh, think about another scenario where we're talking about overhead which relates to electricity consumption. Do we have some kind of an estimates of how many units are being consumed by different departments? Uh, or lighting for that matter. Similarly, we are looking at from perspective of other expenses, let's say anything which is for the employee welfare. So can I, or we have some kind of a canteen in the in the factory. So can we have the number of workers in each department? So things are we'll be discussing in terms of portioning these overheads where there is no direct relationship with a particular department, but at the same time they need to be portion, guys. They need to be divided amongst these departments. However, we are talking about only the factory overheads here. There is many times involvement of some departments, like the example I just gave, canteen. We talk about finance, HR. There are a lot of departments which are not production departments, guys. There are sometimes departments that are not production departments. They're not directly involved in production. They are very essence. They're very important. They're very significant when it comes to the operation of the entire unit. Can you guys tell me what do we call these departments? What are those departments I'm talking about here? Any thoughts? Waiting for your answers. I think one answer, one example I just gave, right? Canteen. We talk about finance, we talk about HR, IT team, information technology, right? We talked about the HR in the labor session as well. Okay, any answers coming up? So are we calling them as something called as a service department, guys? Service department costs. So are service departments important? Is existence of a service department relevant? Of course, yes. They're the one who are providing the services. They're the one which we are basically acting as a backbone of the main production departments here. So we are looking at what happens of service department cost. Now, I want to go back to the step two. So first one, estimation. Second was allocation. Third was apportionment. So from fourth point, if I want to look at the step two, where I was allocating the overheads, that means I might have allocated, Sweetie says supporting department. Yeah, so Sweetie, I'm just using a generic name called service department. So from point number four, from step number four, I'm kind of correlating something from step number two. When I would have allocated some overheads, I would have allocated these expenses even to the service departments, guys. Right? So let's say they are talking about, as an example, I'm talking about six departments here, and we are looking at four production departments, P1, P2, P3, P4, and two service departments. Now, if I look from the step two onwards back again, I would have already allocated some overheads to respective department, irrespective of its product or service. Then, if there were some expenses for the entire unit, I would have also apportioned them. like the rent we were talking about. Now, the point here is once we have done the allocation and apportionment, you guys all agree that there are certain expenses which land up into the bucket of service departments here. Now, this is also a very important aspect, guys, that we need to understand that we have to reapportion now the service department cost to the production departments. Why? Because we're talking about factory overhead. We are talking about the manufacturing overhead that gets added up into the cost, and you don't want to miss these elements of the cost, guys. Some of the cost was allocated to the service department, some of the cost was proportional to the service department cost. We cannot leave them back. We have to ensure whatever is clubbed here as part of the step 2 and step 3 now gets reapportioned to this production departments, and we will discuss the methodologies for this as well in today's session, right? I hope the basic idea is clear to everyone. Very basic idea what we are doing here in terms of the inclusion of the factory overheads in the manufacturing cost. Uh, where we started from is step number 1, that we're looking at estimation of the overheads. We start with the budgeted overheads. That's where the concept of absorption comes into picture. I said we cannot wait for the actual expenses to happen. A lot of actual expenses materializes even after the period is ended, month is ended, or a quarter is ended. So what we need to do here is we initially start with the estimate or a budgeted overheads. We do all the allocations based on the budgets. And then when we are talking about including these in the production cost, we use something called as a absorption rates. We basically calculate something called predetermined rates. And will discuss how do we include this as a mechanism, because this predetermined rate helps us in inclusion of the overheads in the cost. We will compare the absorbed overheads with the actual overheads later on. So initial accounting over overheads is what we are discussing from a traditional perspective is absorption of overheads, guys. This is a term we need to understand for today's session. When we are saying overhead accounting, we are saying overhead accounting using absorption costing. On Thursday, we will be discussing what are the drawbacks of this absorption mechanism. Can we have better mechanisms of accounting for these overheads? We'll talk about that later though. But now is the time to understand few areas on this particular table. Let's say, for example, what is the difference between the allocation and absorption, guys? Let me recapitulate this. What is the difference between allocation and absorption? Who will tell me? Allocation and apportionment, or allocation versus absorption. What is the difference, guys? Who will tell me? So basically, I'm talking about the second and third step. Allocation versus apportionment. Let's see if we have some answers coming up. Okay, so in nutshell, what we are speaking here is that allocation is allocating the expenses to one department or respective department where the costs are directly related. And apportionment is, so basically allocation is a direct method and apportionment is indirectly allocation. It's indirect allocation. Indirectly, you're allocating those expenses to different departments by using some mechanism, by using some basis. So what we need to understand here is what could be the various factors for apportionment here. So we are looking at apportionment aspect. For example, we are talking about rent. So these are some examples I've already discussed. So CT says allocation is directly attributable. That's absolutely correct. So allocation is directly attributable, but apportionment is what we need to consider in terms of indirect allocation. So we have to find some basis on which I can allocate that cost, which is basically apportionment here. So rent, floor area, talking about let's say labor welfare expenses. We're looking at number of workers, Similarly, any kinds of work visits or direct wages could be a good. General overhead could be based on. Now, this is very interesting, guys. General overhead, we are basing this on the direct labor hours or machine hours. Now, this sometimes depends on organization to organization or even department to department. Some departments are, let's say, labor intensive units. Some departments could be are more of a automated. In that case, what we need to understand is probably we need to take the machine hours as well, right? So, depreciation of plant and machinery, this is very commonly tested, guys, where capital values would be relevant. And then you're talking about the lighting expenses, number of lighting points in different departments. So, all these are factors for apportionment, guys. Now, basically, what we are discussing here is that uh, a food for thought, let's say I'm talking about rent. I'm simply divided by the floor area. We're talking about lighting here. It's simply divided by the lighting points. But what if there are certain overheads which are not volume driven? What if there are certain overheads which are not volume driven? So even if, let's say, in a particular department, I produce 100 units versus, let's say, 800 units, the expenses are allocated based on the lighting units. It's kind of creating some kind of a issue here. Some answer coming in from Sayanto here. Allocation is the process of assigning the overheads to specific overheads. Apportionment means to distribute the cost for multiple departments. Superb terminology being used here. Very nice. So basically, we are distributing, we are reallocating, or whatever the remaining overheads are, we are allocating that on these bases. So yeah, I was talking about everyone, Kiran, Sayanto, is is that what if some expenses are not volume driven? The example I was giving you. What if I'm producing 100 units versus 800 units? Lighting points are same in my department. So am I saying in both the situations, the lighting expenses will be allocated same? It seems yes as of now. But we will have a question mark on this later on. We have ultimately we'll be discussing these logical mechanisms. Some of these may be, some of these may not be. And that's why apart from the absorption costing, my friends, we will be discussing some other basis of mechanisms like activity-based costing as well. As of now, we are focusing that, okay, the best availability of the information, we are using traditional ways of costing here. We are using these factors to allocate, to apportion the cost to the different departments here. So these are some examples just for your reference. Now, I would like to talk about what are the factors which will be used for reapportionment of service department costs. So let's say we have in various service departments also. I think if I'm not wrong, similar factors would be used. If you're talking about from a reapportionment of a service department cost, logically the answer looks to be yes. Because initially I'm talking about the production departments and service departments. I'm not talking about allocating the service cost to the production cost as of now. But what I'm trying to say here is, guys, when it comes to the allocation here, when we're talking about the reapportionment of the service department cost to the production department cost, there could be various mechanisms which could be based on the similar factors. So let's have a look at that as well. So, what are these service departments? What are these service departments? So, we are taking some examples in this case, canteen, we're talking about timekeeping, that is admin section, or we're talking about the IT section, which is a computer section, and we're talking about a repair shop. So these service departments are providing internal services to my production departments, guys. Is there a way where I can allocate these costs? Of course, very similar. For example, canteen number of workers is a very good example. What about the HR? What about the personnel department? The HR would be involved in the number of appraisals, number of hirings, trainings. So they will be, we have to allocate their cost. We have to apportion their cost based on the number of workers. What about the IT section, guys? Their time is involved and a lot of IT issues can be raised by various teams. So I think the good answer would be computer hours, or I would say in the present day world, in the corporates, we can allocate these costs based on the IT tickets raised by various departments. This is one example we're talking about from our services, guys. Now, these are the factors, guys. These are the factors which help us to apportion or rather reapportion the service department to the production departments. But my point here is this also has to be done with a mechanism. For example, I have reapportioned some of the cost to the service department cost, but how do I divide this to the production part? That I'm trying to discuss here is, as I said, that in my previous example, that there are six departments. There are six departments here. Production one, we're talking about P1, we're talking about P2, P3, P4, S1, and S2. These are the parameters that can be helping me in reapportionment. But the point here is, can I just pick up the service department cost and allocate that to the production department cost? Because at times what will happen, guys, is that I need an answer for this. So let's say we take the example of two service departments here. I'm talking about HR, that is personal department, human resource, and I'm talking about the IT. Is there a possibility that these two departments also avail each other's services? Yes or no? Is there a possibility that each of these two departments will avail each other's services? Yes or no? I think the answer should be, of course, yes, right? We are talking about the departments will be availing the services because the HR team can have a computer issues. Similarly, we're talking about IT team can, so basically the IT team will be handling those issues for the HR, and since IT team will be having people working in the department, HR will have to work on their hirings, their trainings, right? So it is also dependent, guys, if you understand these requirements. So there are different methods. There are different methods of reapportionment. That's what we are discussing now. The first one is, and after that, we'll be having a good practical example of how to implement this. So the methods of reapportionment include a direct redistribution method. Now, the problem with this method is this ignores the fact we just discussed. It ignores the fact that, okay, the service departments render services to each other also. They are just kind of transferring the services department cost to the production departments directly. So direct method. Then there is something called step method or non-reciprocal method. There is a meaning for the step method. The word step is important here, and the word non-reciprocal is very, very important. Now, it gives respect. It recognizes that, okay, services are available amongst the service departments. However, it just considers that, okay, service department of, let's say, service department one is availing the service department two cost or services, but not vice versa. So it is a non-reciprocal method. It's a step method. We will start with, so for example, again, let's take a very simple example, P1, P2, P3, service 1, service 2. So what will they say here is that, okay, S1 is availing the services of S2. So S2's cost will be allocated to S1, P3, P2, and P1. But then we will be having the S1 cost to be allocated here. It will not go back to S2. S1 cost will only go to the production departments. That means it is recognizing the services rendered by one service department to another, but not vice versa. That is why we are saying it is a non-reciprocal method case. It is a step method because we are going step by step. Now, the question is, which service department should we start with? Now, the answer is for you guys is, of course, the question will indicate which service department will start with, or generally we can go with the volume, like the highest services providing department start with here. The next one is reciprocal service method. I think by now you know the answer. Reciprocal service method is the one which is including all the aspects here. They are recognized the exchange of services among the department. That means we have to go back. We have to consider S1 giving services to S2 and vice versa. S2 giving services to S1, where S is service department. So this considers both the aspects. And there are further three methods within the reciprocal method, which is the equation, trial and error, and repeated distribution, I will talk about that. But first, my friends, whatever we have discussed till now, it's time for us to work on a question together. And I would like your active involvement in solving this together, guys. We will be giving you some information with respect to the indirect expenses or overheads for production departments, for service departments. We will be working on the distribution of the overheads to the various departments. We'll be discussing initial apportionment and then reapportionment of service department cost as well. I'm sure everyone is ready for the action here. Any doubts till now, please let me know. So else we are moving ahead with a practice question in front of you. And my humble request is for everyone here is maybe you guys can take a snapshot of this question, and so that while you are solving this together with me, you guys can provide your inputs. I want everyone to solve this together, guys. Okay, so we are looking at question number one. What this tells us is HCP Limited is a manufacturing company having two production departments, P and Q, two service departments, R and S. Now, the budget cost information for the month of October is given to us. Remember, budgeted cost, we started with the budget, right? We're looking at indirect material, labor, which is specifically mentioned to different departments, right? Indirect material is mentioned, labor is mentioned to the production departments. But look at other expenses, guys. Factory rent, depreciation on machinery, power, security expenses, insurance, supervisor expenses are kind of mentioned as a total. So that means that they are seeking our help in apportionment and because allocation seems to be there, but we have to take care of apportionment and the service department cost. For helping us, they have given some additional information on the right side. This is the additional information. Floor area. I'm already thinking, already some light bulbs are switching on in my mind. That okay, we were talking about rent, we are given the floor area. We were talking about depreciation, they have given us the book value of the machinery. We're also talking about horsepower of machines, machine hours, number of employees, and labor hours. And look at this information, guys. Very important piece of information for service departments. Overhead cost of the two service department are distributed using step method in the same order. That is R and S respectively on the following basis. So probably we are going with first R and then S. And they've also given the methods of apportionment. For department R, we are using number of employees. Department F, we are talking about machine hours. I somehow feel, I somehow feel that was that evident from the information given? Factors for the service department reapportionment. Can anyone tell me why I'm asking this? Department R, number of employees, and Department S, machine hours. They have mentioned that that's good for us. But what I'm asking here is, was it evident from the information given in the questions, guys? Sometimes they may give you a statement where you're requested to find a suitable mechanism of reapportionment of service department cost and give your basis for your, give justification for your selection. In that case, what do? You have to identify, you have to understand the information and then make your call and then give the justification also in the answer. I think if you guys have seen for department R and S, I can see here that in terms of the labor hours, a comparison between the machine hours, these two numbers can give you an idea how we are saying that, okay, department R, they're saying that, okay, you can probably go with the number of employees. And for S, we're talking about, okay, machine hours, that probably one department seems to be, more labor intensive than other. And these are the things which, you should be correlating because sometimes they may not be giving you direct information. You have to identify, analyze the information given in the question, and then decide on these factors. So there are three requirements on this question, guys. First is prepare a statement showing the distribution of the overheads to various departments. clearly showing the basis for the distribution. That's first part, which is basically nothing but apportionment. Absolutely safe to says one department is machine oriented, other one is labor. Very nice. Second question is calculating the total budgeted overhead for both production after service departments have been reapportionment. So first question seems to be apportionment. Second question talks about reapportionment. And third is most appropriate overhead absorption rate for each of the production department. So I'm sure you guys are pretty much with me on this, aligned and geared up. So let's kind of take a call here. Let's kind of solve this together, guys. I want you to be involved in this one. So we need to understand that, how do we distribute, how do we apportion these overheads here? So let's do this together. So we're looking at as step one here, which is talking about the apportionment. And for you guys to be with me on this, requested you guys to take a snapshot of the previous slide. If you have not done so, you can do that now. Let me know once you're ready. Okay. So let's say this is overhead apportionment. We are looking at the details here. Basis, what basis we'll be using? Total cost, which is given to us. And then we are looking at the production departments and service departments. So how much cost we have allocated or apportioned to them. So the first one given to us here is, we're talking about the indirect material. We can probably directly plot these. Indirect material is kind of directly given to us. So we're looking at a 177,500. Yes, please let me know if all is well. Let me know if you are all agreeing with the calculations we are doing here. If any discrepancy, please ask your doubts. Indirect material, sorry, indirect labor, the next one. Again, this is given to us. Total cost is 155. However, I can see something here. We are looking at indirect labor 155, and we're talking about 35,000 and 75,000 here. Any thoughts, guys? How do we go about it? We're talking about 155, 1,55,000, and we're talking about 35,000 and 75,000. Does that add up, or do we need to do something about this? Any thoughts? For the indirect labor? Because what I can see is if we combine the 35,000 and 75,000, we are looking at 110 here, or how much? 120, right? So 110. So 110 is a total here. So where does the remaining 45,000 go? Let me seek your inputs. Sweetie says remaining is 45,000. So where does this 45,000 go, guys? Sento, how do you say that? I need answers with rationale. That would be great. Rationale would be very, very important here. So Sento says we are looking at a 15,000 and a 30,000 here. The question is, when you're looking at synthesis, number of machines and number of employees. So 15,000 and 30,000 here. So I hope that's what you said, right? We're looking at the information here. And if you see the number of employees and the number of machines, how does it help us in understanding the indirect labor cost? Anyone else on the query panel? Let me quickly check. Okay. Unikrishnan says a portion between the service departments on the labor hours. So if I go with the labor hours, would the numbers be different then? Would the numbers be different in that case? If I go with the labor hours, because we are talking about 15,000 and 30,000, but if I talk about the labor hours given to us here is 1200 and 600. So department R is number of employees, what they're talking about. Department S, we're talking about machine hours, is something you guys are considering this. I think that is with respect to how we are allocating these costs as well, right? So basically we're saying that overhead costs of the two service department are distributed using step order on the following basis. So we'll be considering that as well. That's definitely a correct answer. But still my point is how we are deciding on the labor hours in terms of information given to us. How do we allocate this 15 and 30? Is there another ratio we are looking at? Is it 2 is to 1? And if 2 is to 1 is the ratio, should it be 30 and 15? That's what I would want to consider here. Department R, as it is labor intensive, someone told me. Department R is labor intensive, but that doesn't mean that Department S, there are no workers working here. Guys, any thoughts? Need quick answers? See, that is okay. Department P is machine oriented, Department Q is labor oriented. That is something very much fine. But my question simply here is that on what basis we are dividing uh, the indirect labor here? Indirect labor here. Pratima says it should be ideally divided on the service department cost on the basis of number of employees. So if I'm seeing the number of employees here, we are looking at 6 versus 4, I guess. That's what we're talking about. So will number of employees change the information to us? Okay, let's do one thing. Let's do one thing. We'll talk about this service department cost, indirect labor also. How do we allocate this service department indirect cost? But let's kind of focus on other overheads as well. Let's talk about how do we take care of the factory rent and depreciation also. Probably you guys will get the answer yourself. So the next one is factory rent, right? So factory rent is how much? Factory rent is how much? Factory rent is 75,000, right? So what would be the area here? Uh, Basically the basis should be ideally the area given to us. Right? So we're looking at area given to us is 1250, 750, 200 and 300. So what is that ratio, guys? What is that ratio? If you want to allocate the cost, so we are talking about 125 is to 75 is to 25, 20 is to 30, right? So that means the total becomes 2500. So we are allocating based on the floor area, which would be Sento absolutely correct. So which means 50% of the cost are going into the production department P here. That is 37,500, right? And we're looking at a 75 by 2,500. That is almost 30% cost we're looking at. Not 30%. How much will be that, guys? Or yes, actually 30% cost going to them, 22,500 here. What about the R and S here? Thanks, guys. Some people are helping me in the calculation. So we are looking at the remaining portion for the rent is going to be in the ratio of 6,000 and 9,000 here. Absolutely correct. Next given to us is depreciation of machinery. Depreciation of machinery. And for the depreciation of the machinery, they are telling you the net book value of the machinery. Probably that would be a good basis. So we're saying 21, 5 lakhs, 1 lakh, 3 lakhs. So 21 is to 5 is to 1 is to 3. So we're saying 21 is to 5 is to 1 is to 3. We have having a depreciation here of 37,500. So that means more or less 70% depreciation is going to the production department P here. So we're looking at 37,500 into 70%, which is 26,250. Similarly, 5 by 30. That means we're looking at 6,250 here for Q, and the remaining goes here 1250 and 3750. Let's double check. Let me know if there are any doubts till this point. Till this point, any doubts? Please let me know, guys. Double check your workings. I hope everyone doing good, guys. Can we move ahead? Okay. So the next one is the power. That's interesting, right? We talk about power here. I told you to be taking the basis and also make sure that you are able to justify. So if I have to justify 96,000 allocation, what is the option I'm having based on the information given to us? One is they're talking about, and again, there is no right or wrong in this perspective. It's just that you have to give your basis and also justification for the same. So someone may think on that, okay, based on the information given to us, will a horsepower of machine be a good idea? Yes or no? Horsepower of machine would be a good idea. One thought process we are talking about here. Sweetie, absolutely correct. Kenan says machine hours is a very good idea. So we're talking about perspectives here, that means. Someone says, XP of machine, someone says machine hours. What if I can do even a better allocation? Can I get a combination of the two? Like probably HP into machine hours. Because see, what happens is, let's say our department is using less number of hours, but the machine consumption, the power consumption of machine is actually higher. So can I do something like, we can actually multiply these two and get that as a basis? See, I'm not saying that you cannot use machine hours, you cannot use HP of machine. You can use HP of machine and you can probably give your justification, give your assumption over there in the question itself. Do that, in fact. They definitely recommend you to do that so that examiner knows on what basis you have, portion these. So for our purposes, let's say we talk about HP into the hours here. So who will help me if I take HP into hours? What we are looking at? So we are looking at 32 Here 32 is to 2, right? So we are taking 32,000. If you are looking at the product here, so if you look at these numbers in thousands, so what are we getting here? I think 3,200 versus 200 versus 48 versus 96. So 3,200, 200, 48, and 96. So basically, we're saying HP into machine hours here. So if you have to allocate using this, so the total of these factors becomes, I think, 3,544, if I'm not wrong. If I allocate this 96,000 based on this, I want everyone to just double check here. I think I'm getting 86,682. 86,682. Similarly, you can do the same for the others, which is for the department Q here. You're getting 5,418. Then we are getting the remaining portion coming to be as 1,300 and 2,600. Mind you, we are only talking about overhead apportionment. Once we're done with that, we'll be also looking at service department cost reapportionment as well. So if that is clear, what could be the security expenses allocation, guys? I'm just giving 1 minute to everyone to understand the power a bit. In case any doubts, please let me know, or please confirm if the apportionment of power expenses is clear here. So next one is security expenses. And ideally, what would be my basis for security expenses? I think again, a floor area could be a good one here based on the factors given to us. Absolutely. Kiran, Sento, absolutely perfect. So again, 1,250 versus 750, 200, and 300. So based on that, we're getting 12,000, 7,200, 1,920, and 2,880 guys. I hope everyone with me on this till this point. Everyone clear guys till this point? Okay. So let's focus on the next one then, which happens to be the insurance. Insurance may we are looking at what is the total value of the insurance, 12,000. And we are looking at supervisor of 48,000. So if we look at one by one, guys, what do you think insurance would be a better option? I think book value of machinery itself. So 21 is to 5 is to 1 is to 3, which we use for depreciation. So 8,400, 2,000, 400, and 1,200 here. And what about for supervisor? Would be seeking inputs for supervisors. So if it says number of employees, that's perfect. So we're saying number of employees. So that is given to us as 10 is to 30 is to 6 is to 4. So total 50 we are looking at. That means 9,600 here, 40% allocated. Yes, please double check the calculations here. I hope we have allocated everything, portioned everything, not allocated, proportioned. Please let me know. Any doubts on the apportionment part though? Okay. So then we are looking at total of these expenses. And what will be the next step, guys? What will be the next step? I think reapportionment should be my next step. Right? So we're looking at total of these expenses, which ideally should be the total of the overall expenses though. So let's say who will help me here? It seems we are looking at a 625,000, 6,25,000 of a total expense. I would like to first quickly catch up the total of the service department cost. Let me know, guys, if this is kind of what everyone is getting here. In the meantime, let me check any doubts on the query panel here. Sweetie, absolutely correct on the numbers till now. What about others? Because I think next would be important step. Want everyone to be freezing their numbers till this point. No doubt so far. Uni Krishna is asking about, okay, so Uni Krishna is asking about the indirect labor. Okay, someone answered here. I think here Sento answered. So I wanted to ask, someone answered here to take 15 and 30 here. So what was your basis? I think Sento answered that. I think someone else also answered that. How we are allocating the indirect labor here? Quick answer, guys. How we allocate the indirect labor? When we're talking about allocate, I'm talking about between the service departments. Any thoughts? Any thoughts here? Sento says ratio of 1200 is to 600. Ratio of 1200 is to 600. But if we are talking about 1200 is to 600, uh, are you getting these amounts? Just double check. So we're talking about number of employees. That is what we need to double check here, guys. Yes. So Sento, I think I would kind of no, I think that is the next step. Sento is saying that on the most the service department is providing the most services will be allocated first. That will be the next step, Sento. We're talking about the reapportionment, right? We're talking about the reapportionment. So what we are looking here is in terms of the number of employees is ideally the correct answer in the terms of ratio of the number of employees. Most scenarios, Unikrishnan, the direct expenses would be given to you in terms of the apportionment, right? So what we are actually considering here is that we are looking at based on the number of employees versus the overall overhead cost. So overall overhead cost, which we have apportioned based on the other factors. So which comes total for the service department cost as 49,000 something or 68,000. The next step would be ideally to reapportion that to the production cost here. So we are talking about the next step here, which is the total level what we are getting in terms of 49,900 and 68,000. So I think that's where your second point will come to the picture. So we are talking about reapportionment here. That is what the requirement of the second part of the question was. So we are looking at a PQ. Just give me a second, guys. My screen got stuck. Okay, so it's fine. And what we have got as a total overhead till now is, let's quickly put in these numbers. 310182. Now, based on the information given in the question, how do we start for reapportioning these? Based on the information given in the question here, how do we start? Please let me know, guys. I think we're talking about in that particular order. So are we saying that first we should be ideally allocating our cost, and they've given us number of employees here? So if you have to follow that information, we are saying first we are looking at R to be reapportioned. So that means this 49,900 needs to go to the other departments based on the number of employees. So number of employees is given to us is 10, 30, 6, and 4. But my question is, what is the ratio I am looking at here? What is the ratio I am looking at for reapportionment? Any thoughts, guys? Are we saying 10 is to 30 is to 4? Are we saying 10 is to 30 is to 4? We are not considering, we are not considering the R number of employees itself, because that is what will be used. So 10 is to 30 is to 4. So if I talk about the overall 49,900, I'm saying this as 11,341 for our department, our service department cost to be reapportionment to the pre-production department. Similarly, I think the maximum number of employees are with department Q here. So we're getting a 6-1. Just give me a second. This is 4536, I guess. Yeah. Guys, please double check your allocations are as per the screen here. You can quickly note down. So that means based on the step. Now, this is a step method, guys. So if I follow the step method, this is kind of gone. R is gone here. Whereas the total service department cost of S becomes 72,536. 72,536. Yes, are you guys getting the same allocation here? Please confirm. Because next would be the service department S, which will be reportioned based on the machine hours. And now we are not going back to S from S to R here. Mind you, it's a step method. This is no, we're not going back from S to R. We're only, reapportioning S to P and Q. And for P and Q, the machine hours are given to us. The machine hours are given to us as 4,000 and 1,000. So 4 is to 1, ideally the ratio we are looking at. So we are saying here 72,536. That is 58,029 here in terms of the production department. And we are looking at the remaining cost to be going to the Q department. So this is my total budgeted overhead, guys. So this is coming to, we're looking at, it should be 552, I guess. So saying a 379,552. And this seems 245,448. So that is my total overhead. So I think if we go back to the requirements, we have done two steps here, guys. We have done the two steps here. Initial was the allocation, apportionment, and then we are talking about the reapportionment here. Everyone doing good? Because if you guys are fine till this step, the next step is an answer which I would be requiring you guys to tell me. The third part of that question was calculate the most appropriate overhead absorption rate. The keyword is most appropriate overhead absorption rate for each of the production department. So first you will tell me what would be the most appropriate absorption rate here. Only question 4 is to 1 means, so if you go back to the question, the machine hours are 4,000 and 1,000 here, right? 4 is to 1. That's what we took. 4 is to 1. Okay. Nice. So who will tell me what would be the most appropriate absorption rate here? I think you guys already know the answer, right? How do we absorb these overheads? See, what do you mean by absorption? I will talk about this also in the next half an hour. See, what we need to do is, these are all based on the budgeted overheads, right? These are based on the budgeted overheads. Synthesis, actual machine hours and labor hours. Uh, that's absolutely correct. What we are looking at here is, they've given us the machine hours and labor hours. And we are actually, so Santa, like just to add one thing. This is the budgeted information, right? This is the budgeted information. Right now, we are calculating the absorption rate. So, which is for department R or department S, that was a service department given to us. But if you look at what about department P and Q? So, if you look at department P and Q, can I say P looks to be more machine oriented, 4,000, and Q appears to be more labor intensive. So, let me just change the color of my pen here. So, I'm looking like this. So we are saying that there are more labor hours in department Q and there are more machine hours in P. So in that case, can I say that this looks to be a machine hours and this looks to be the labor hours. Now this is only the absorption rate, mind you. When I say absorption rate, we are just kind of plotting this here that, okay, machine hours were here 4,000 and this is 6,000. So what we need to do is we need to just divide this cost by these respective drivers or hours. So let's say 379,552 divided by 4,000 gives me 94.89 here. 94.89. Similarly, if we talk about the next one, we are looking at 40.91. Now, what is this? So Sayanta said that we will use the actual hours. So Sayanta, what I'm trying to say here is, and this is basically the another concept you need to know, and that was, I think probably we can take a break after this and then we'll discuss that. Is we have calculated the absorption rate here. That is the requirement, the third requirement here. Overhead absorption rate. So we're calling it as an overhead absorption rate. But how do we actually absorb the overhead? So we will apply these rates to the actual hours. We'll discuss this later on, guys. We'll apply these rates on the actual hours. I think, Sayanto, that's what you were trying to say, right? So that will be the stage later on. How do we absorb the total overheads? Will be based on these absorption rates multiplied by the actual hours. And that we will be comparing, guys, with the actual overheads. That is something will be our next step, not part of this question though. So let's, before we take a break, guys, I wanted to quickly talk about uh, quick summary here. Whatever we have discussed is a quick synopsis in terms of the overall allocation apportionment step by step. So initial discussion was allocation. Allocation was direct allocation of the cost to the different departments. Then we talk about the apportionment. Apportionment means that after the allocated overheads, we had to apportion the overheads to different departments based on some factors for the expenses which were common to the different departments, like rent, talk about the electricity and everything else, right? After that, once you get the total overheads of service departments here, that service department cost gets reapportioned to department A, B, and C here, like we did right now. And based on the total overheads after department C, mind you, in this case, my production departments. In this case, my production departments, that will be the overhead, the factory cost that will be going into my product cost will be A, B, and C. But that doesn't mean that we ignore the service department cost. So that needs to get fit in over here. And that's why we are doing this reapportionment. Based on whatever the total number I'm getting for this, we will be calculating a absorption rate. But the point here is what we have not discussed so far. What would be the ideal absorption rate? We have seen an example. We have solved a question where based on the information we determined the department P is more a machine intensive department. So let's use machine hours. Department Q is a more labor intensive department. Let's use labor hours. So am I saying that even for the absorption, there are different mechanisms? Answer is yes. Answer is absolutely yes. Even for the absorption, there are different rates, guys. And that's what we'll be discussing. But let's take a quick break here before we go there. So we will be starting with methods of absorption of overhead rates. We'll see one of them we have already seen in that question, and then probably we'll see, okay, how do we take care of under absorption and over absorption, and do some more practice, but on the other side of the break, guys. So let's take a quick break. Let's resume in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back, guys. So we're all back after much deserving break. So we're talking about before the break, guys, in terms of the methods of absorption of the overhead. Uh, Before we move ahead with the types of rates, in the last question we have already discussed one absorption overhead rate, guys. And what we did, we justified ourselves based on the information given in the question, and we justified our answer for point number third. So let me just go back to that slide. And there were question from Sweetie, and I think earlier Uni Krishnan was also asking. So Sweetie, basically what we are trying to do here is that there were a couple of ways where I think Uni Krishnan, this is the question you also asked. Sayanto also answered that. But Sayanto, did you wonder that if you would have used the labor hours, the answer would be not 15 and 30, but rather 30 and 15? I think that's what the confusion was, right? If I'm not wrong. So I would like just talk about that if there is no specific information given in the question with respect to the indirect labor. So what let's do one thing is let's assume that that number is based on the direct information given in the question. So we if they have not given this information in the question, they have to include any kind of an assumption in our answer, which in my case, I would have definitely taken the labor hours as a definite apportionment. What we Since we have taken 15,000 and 30,000, we are just assuming that that is given as part of the question itself. But if this is not given to us, you would have taken labor hours as a base. But then you have to justify our inclusion. Sweetie, I hope that is okay because we have done the entire working based on that. So we are assuming that that direct allocation is given to us. However, my whole point on this question is the point number third here. We are saying most appropriate overhead absorption rate. We just based on the utilization capacity, we are looking at the machine hours and the labor hours. However, can there be more rates? How do we decide what will on what basis the overhead will be absorbed here? That's what the discussion all about. We are looking at various possibilities: percentage of direct materials, percentage of prime cost, percentage of direct labor cost, labor hour rate, machine hour rate, or rate per unit of output. So what we have done here is in that question, we have taken two rates, right? So we talk about a labor hour rate, we have talked about the machine hour rate. Right? That's what we have done. So actually, in reality, and in most of the questions you would be seeing, these are the most common, guys. These are the most common here. We are looking at a labor hour rate or a machine hour rate. But what we are discussing, what we are calling it as basically, this is nothing but a kind of a predetermined rate. Why I'm calling it as a predetermined absorption rate? Any thoughts? Why we are calling it as a predetermined overhead rate? Any thoughts, guys? So basically, we are looking at a different types of bases. What I'm focusing on this one, predetermined overhead rate. Because the answer is that we are looking at the budgeted amounts, budgeted overheads and the budgeted base. We are not waiting for the actuals. So we'll be most of the times we'll be using predetermined rate, guys. There could be different rates. There could be even you can calculate based on the actual. You can do that comparison. You can use a departmental overhead rate. So I think in the priority, most of the times you'll be using the predetermined rate. And sometimes you may use the departmental overhead rate also, where different departments like we did actually combination of two in that question because the question was asking us which is the ideal basis. So we took different base for the different departments over there. So as I said, there are different absorption rates, guys. Most of the times you will be using labor hour, machine hour, but you can see there are other also, for example, rate per unit of output. These are traditional ways, guys. Now look at the last one, uh, rate per unit of output. So what if there are different departments having different outputs and I just divide by the number of units? But the problem with these is that, and we'll be seeing that on Thursday, that all these rates are volume driven. Is it always okay that we are looking at the rate which can be actually based on activity level, or there could be a scenario where the overheads can be driven by some other factors? Because sometimes what happens, guys, is let's say a volume may not itself drive the cost. So I will have that discussion. I'll leave that discussion for Thursday though. But what I'm trying to say that these are all traditional methods, guys. Percentage of direct materials, you can take the percentage of direct materials for different departments and allocate. And similarly, you can take the even the prime cost. So prime cost is material plus labor, right? So most common here are is labor hour and machine hour rate. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Now, As I said, we are not waiting for the for absorbing the overhead, for making sure that we are talking about a costing based on the apportionment inclusion of the overheads in our product cost. We are going ahead with the budgeted level of activities. But what happens if the actual numbers are different? What happens if the actual numbers are different, guys? In that case, there could be a scenario of some difference. Let's say based on my absorption, I would like to ask this question to everyone here. Let's take an example here, guys. Let's say my absorbed overhead. Let's say we have a predetermined rate of 20 per machine hour. Let's say there are 10,000 hours here. So what will be the absorbed overhead here? 2 lakhs. And this is an example we are discussing. Let's say the actual overheads are 2,10,000. Now, there could be various possibilities for this. There could be various possibilities for this. One is that, okay, we probably had incurred more amount than we budgeted. That is clear cut and observation. Anything else? Anything else? Can I also say that there could be a possibility that I produced less than anticipated? Because that's why absorption was less, right? Absorption was less. What do you think, guys? So we are talking about absorbed overhead versus actual overhead. There is something which will be also discussed in variance analysis later on. But a preliminary understanding would be handy here. Okay, we have absorbed 200,000, but we are looking at uh, an actual 2 lakh 10,000. So 10,000 extra overhead incurred. Now, what is that 10,000 related to? It could be related to either we are talking about more expenses incurred or we are talking about less production happening here. So this is a scenario where we are looking at under absorbed overhead. We could be having a different scenario also. What if the actual overheads were 1,92,000? That means probably we produced more than with what we thought. We were over efficient or we incurred less. So those are the discussions we will be talking about, guys, in uh, in the overhead absorption in terms of under absorption or over absorption. Before we go there, time for some brain teasers, guys. So a couple of MCQs on your screen. So while you answer, please mention your answer whether it is for question number 1 or question number 2. Waiting for responses, guys. The first question is allotment of whole items of cost to cost centers or cost units is called what? Whatever we have discussed before the break. What is the answer for question number 1? You can answer either on the query panel or here as well. Already getting some interesting answers here. Yeah, getting different answers for question number 1. Oh, I think, sweetie, you change your answer, right? What about others? What about others? What do you think, guys? So you have to be very, very careful. What is the call of the question here? Allotment of whole items of cost to cost centers or cost units. What does this mean actually? Are we saying, are we apportioning them? Or is it basically the costs which are incurred by respective departments? See, logically, this is basically a cost allocation, nothing else, guys. Cost allocation, the first step itself, right? So the question number 1 should be ideally C, cost allocation. Okay, the couple of answers I got on the query panel, I think they were option number C, in fact. Okay. So what about question number two? Which of the following is not the classification of overhead based on its functionality? Not the classification of overhead based on its functionality. Let's see for question number two. I think Pratima, Sweetie, everyone answering one option here, common response coming up. So by functionality, I think we discussed different departments, right? I think one function we have talked about so far is nothing but your factory, right? Factory overheads. And if that is the case, we're talking about factory overhead. It is a classification based on the function. We're talking about administrative overhead is definitely a classification based on the function. And even selling and general overhead, right? Selling and distribution. So that means the only overhead we're talking about is the fixed one, which is based on the volume classification, not a functional classification. So option number C is absolutely correct, right, Bhumika? Great. So now we talk about quickly what happens, guys, in terms of the absorption of or under absorption of the overhead. Let's quickly recap everything. So we need to understand, we need to compare the absorbed overhead with the actual overheads versus actual overheads. And we are saying here is that okay, there could be a under or over absorption. When is the under absorption, guys? When there is an under absorption, when your absorb is less than the actual overhead. And if you're talking about absorption overhead is more than the actual overheads, that means it's an over absorption. So my question here is to everyone here, what do you think, guys? And is under absorption good for the organization? Is under absorption good for the organization? That analysis part is also very important for you guys. Waiting for responses. Here also you guys can respond on Zoom. People on the query panel can please quickly respond to my question. Is it good for the organization or not? So this is not good. Of course, answer should be not good, right? So absorb means I did not do well, right? So in that case, under absorption means you did not do well. As I said, there could be, so if you're talking about under absorption, guys, there are two possibilities. Either it is less production or more incurring. So incurred more expense or doing less production, neither of them is good. Over absorption is actually good. You know, you produced more than you thought you budgeted for, or the actual expenses were less. And the point is, where do we account for them? Where do we account for them? Now, if the amount of these under or over is kind of pretty small, or or I would say, if they are due to wrong estimation or any kind of abnormal reason, you should take to P&L. However, if it is absolutely not a small amount, neither because of any kind of abnormal reason here, that means you missed out something, then you should calculate a supplementary rate and include that under and over absorption into the respective sections. Respective section means what could have happened to the production. So if the production, the number of units produced, some of them would have been sold, some of them could have been in the stock, and some of them would be still in the production. So we are talking about if the amount of over and under absorbed is pretty much immaterial, very small, charge it to P&L. If you're saying that due to wrong estimates or let's say any abnormal reason, charge it to P&L. If none of these is the reason, then please incorporate that into the respective areas. As I said, guys, didn't I say that we will start with the predetermined overhead. We'll start with the budgeted overheads. We will include that in the product cost. Later on, we will compare with the actual cost. And if required, we will consider that as well. That is the time right now. So if there is under absorption, we are including that difference. You know, it's we're not charging that. So well, let's say I'm not taking this to P&L. I have to include that using a supplementary rate into my finished goods, semi-finished goods, or cost of sales. Of course, we have to debit them. But if it is over absorption, we can reduce the cost because we have already include extra cost here. See, I hope everyone is with me on this. If it is a case of under absorption, you will have to, because the actual expense is more, so you have to charge more the finished goods, WIP, and the cost of sales. But if it is an over absorption, which is good, which is a kind of a benefit, kind of a gain, so these respective accounts will be credited, guys. I hope everyone with me on this. Everyone clear on the treatment of over absorption and under absorption. Because we'll be discussing a question then. So let's time for some practice here. So let's look at this question number 2 then. I hope everyone can see question number 2. A machine costing 1 crores is expected to run for 10 years. End of this period, its scrap value is likely to be 9 lakhs. Repairs during the whole life of the machine are to be 18 lakhs. The machine is expected to run 4380 hours, 4380 hours on average. Electricity consumption is 15 units per hour. And the rate per being is here in terms of the 5. Machine occupies 1/4 of the area. Foreman has to devote about 1/6 of his time. The monthly rent is given to us. Lighting charges given to us. Foreman is paid a salary as well. And we have to find out the machine rate, assuming insurance is 1% and expenses is given to us as a 900 per month case. So let's tackle this together, guys, as we did other questions. Based on the facts, guys, where do we start from? Where do we start from? Mind you, the requirement here is we have to find out the machine hour rate, and a lot of aspects are given to us per month, right? Can I see that per month information is given to us? So Kiran says calculation of depreciation is definitely one thing. So yeah, we can probably do that calculation and include. So we have to calculate the machine hour rate, right? At the end of the day, so we have to kind of tackle all the expenses. So what is the depreciation, guys? What is the depreciation? So in this case, we are looking at a 1 crore. We are looking at a scrap value of 9 lakhs, 10 years. That means, are we looking at a depreciation of 9 lakh 10,000, guys, per annum? Kiran says 75,833 per month. So we have a depreciation coming up as 9 lakh 10,000, but that needs to be divided by 12 months to get 75,833 is what everyone agrees with me. We're looking at a rent here. Rent is also given to us. The monthly rent of the department is 30,000, but that is for the entire department. I guess somewhere they have mentioned about the floor also, right? Area. The machine occupies 1/4 of the area. So we're about 1/4 of the rent here. So monthly rent is 30,000, but we are only considering 7,500 because only 1/4 of the area is given to us or allocated to this particular department. Can anyone tell me what should be the lighting charges? What should be the lighting charges here? 8,000 per month. Should I mention 8,000 here? Or I think even the lighting points they have mentioned that the department here is have 2 points out of a total of 10 for lighting. Since the 8,000 here, but are we saying 8,000 for this particular department here? We're saying only 2 points out of 10. So maybe 2 by 10 of 8,000, right? Which is 1,600. What all expenses we have? We're talking about a foreman salary here, which is foreman is devoting 1/6 of his time to the machine, right? So foreman is having a 1/6 of 19,200. That means 3,200. Anything else we should include here? I think they have mentioned something about the insurance also. Insurance is like 1% per annum. If it about 1 lakh divided by 12, 8,333, I guess, insurance. 1% is given, right? 1% of the machine value. Anything else we are leaving here? Now, mind you, there are few more expenses, right? So the best way to look at is when we are calculating the machine hour rate, guys. We need to include all the overheads, whether it is fixed or variable in nature. So there are repairs, there are electricity still to be considered. Kiran said sundry expenses. So what are the sundry expenses here? The last point they mentioned, 900. What would be the electricity? What would be the electricity, guys? They mentioned something on the units. Rate per unit is 5. Electricity consumption is 15 per hour. So how do we take that? Mind you, the requirement is machine hour. The requirement here is we have to calculate the machine hour rate. So hourly rate. Now, in the case of the electricity, we are already given the hourly rate, right? So what we can do is we can basically compute a overall total till now, which is basically the kind of a fixed charges we have. Can anyone tell me what is the total amount till this point? Total amount till this point? What is the total amount we are getting here? Are we getting 97,366? And if that is the case, can I calculate hourly rate here? Per hour is how much? Per hour is how much, guys? So that is something we need to quickly check. In the first line, or rather, in the beginning of the question, in the third line, there was mentioned that the machine is expected to run 4,380 hours per year on average. So 4,380 divided by 12. So per month, because all these expenses are monthly expenses, we're getting 365 hours per month. We're getting 365 hours per month, right? Is everyone with me on this? So that means if these are my monthly expenses, we can calculate per hour here 97,366 divided by 365. So it gives us a 267 here. We're getting a 267 or 266.67, 266.76, right? And then we can add the other expenses which are of variable nature. Electricity was given to us, 15 units into 5, that is 75. Anything else, guys? Anything else which we need to include as part of the other expenses? I think repair is also given to us. Repairs during the whole life of the machine are 18 lakhs. Have we considered that already? How much will be the repair charges, guys? Mind you, if we are talking about the repairs here, it is given to us as 18 lakhs. So that means if I talk about the total number of hours is 4380, and again we are looking at from a perspective of per hour, which gives us a, is just double check please. How much are we getting here for a repair cost? 18 lakhs, activity level of, how much is the activity level here? 4380 into 10, right? Because we are looking at 10 years and we are looking at, so this is a very, very important point, guys. The machine is expected to run for 10 years. At the end of this period, the scrap is this, repairs during the whole life. And they've given the machine is expected to run 4380 hours per year. So from a perspective of the whole life, we are saying 43,800 hours for the entire life of the machine. So hence, we are getting a 41.96 per hour here. Yes, please double check. Let me know if you guys are fine with this. So we are getting a total amount of approximately 383 point something. So we're getting 383 point something, right? Please let me know. If someone says it should be 41.1, just double check, guys. Yeah, that's fine. 41.1, 41 point, I think I mentioned 41.96, right? So it should be 41.096 actually. So we can make it 41.1. That's okay. So let's make it 41.1. Are we getting a total of 382.86 here? Thanks, Hemto. Just corrected that. So it was 41.096 and 41.96. Guys, I hope everyone is clear. If everyone is clear, I want to move ahead with another question, which is a very, very important, interesting one, which is based on the illustration. I believe it's illustration 9 of a study material, if I'm not wrong. So we like to talk about that one as well. But before that, before I tackle this one, I would just like to check if there are any doubts. Everyone doing good till this point? Anyone want to ask anything on Zoom? It's only 9. Please let me know. Want to speak? Anyone want to ask something? Or else we are ready to tackle this. So just checking with everyone on the query panel, guys. Please confirm all doing good till this point. Yes, Uday Krishnan. Thanks, Kiran, for confirming. Okay, so if that's the case, let's tackle this as well. This is one of the very, very good illustrations, and there have been questions based on this in the past papers. So I want your active involvement on solving this, guys. Just quickly checking for any queries on the query panel here. Perfect. So we are looking at, thanks, Ruti, for confirming over there. So we're looking at in an engineering company, the factory overheads are recovered on a fixed percentage basis on the direct wages, and administrative overheads are absorbed on a fixed percentage based on the factory cost. Now, this is interesting. We're saying factory overheads are based on a fixed percentage on a direct wages, and administrative are absorbed on the factory cost. I believe everyone with me on this. When I say administrative costs are absorbed on the factory cost, which would include the factory overheads, right? We don't know the factory overheads, yes, because factory overheads. So we are looking at, think from this perspective. We're saying that, okay, direct material, direct labor plus factory overhead. We are saying that factory overhead is based on the direct labor. And then we are saying that, okay, administrative overhead are based on this, on the fixed percentage of factory cost itself, right? So the company has furnished the following data related to two jobs undertaken by it. Job 1, 101, 102, material wages and selling prices given to us. What you have to calculate is the percentage of the recovery rates for the factory overheads and administrative overheads. Calculate the amount of these and the profit for the two jobs, and then probably use those rates for another job 103 as well. So we have to determine the selling price of job 103 based on that. So it's a very, very interesting one. So if you have to understand this question, you have to compute the rates here. First, of course, we need to understand that, okay, can I to calculate something which is there are two factors involved. One of the factors is determined based on the basis of the wages, and then another determined on the basis of the total factory cost. In between, we have to also calculate the factory overhead itself. So let's do one thing, guys. Let's say, let's say in this case, we're saying that factory overheads are based on the fixed percentage of wages. Let's say this percentage, let this percentage be F here for the factory overhead. And for administrative overhead, we are looking at A. If that is the case, and I look at job 101, if you look at job 101, what do you think? What do you think, guys, would be my factory cost here? What would be my factory cost? So we are looking at 54,000, 42,000, and some percentage of 42,000. So for job 101, my factory cost will be 54,000 plus 42,000 plus some percentage of 42,000, guys. You guys are with me on this? Into F, or not F rather. Yeah, F, that's fine, because we have talked about F as a percentage. So 42,000 into F. Similarly, for job 102, we are saying factory cost would be 37,500 plus 30,000 plus 30,000 into F, because we are using these wages, and that multiplied by that percentage of factory overhead would be my factory cost. Yeah, are you guys good enough till this point, guys? Everyone with me on this? So, guys, please confirm. Perfect. Thanks, Kiran. Thanks, Anto. Now that means if I look at logically, if I logically look at the next step, which is administrative overhead, which is based on the percentage of the factory cost. So what we will get is, if we add the factory cost plus administrative overhead, we are ideally getting cost of sales. Ideally getting cost of sales, guys. So that means for job 101, we are looking at 96,000. How did I say 96,000, guys? 54 plus 42. plus 42,000 F. Maybe this is the factory cost plus administrative overhead, which is A. So 96,000 plus 42,000 into A here, 42,000 F, right? So into A, because we are talking about administrative overhead is a percentage of factory cost, guys. Administrative overhead is a percentage of factory cost. So that means A has to be percentage of the factory cost, which itself is an equation. 96 plus 42,000 F. So that is something we need to be very, very careful about. What is this value, by the way? What are these values, guys? Now, we have talked about a selling price given to us of 166,650 and 128,250. They have talked about some additional data in which the profit on selling price is given to us as well. But are we talking about that for the other job? So what will be the profit on this, guys? What will be the profit on this? Who will tell me? Waiting for responses. So profit on, we will be needing the profit margin as well, right? So let's say part of this question is that profit margin here for job 101 is 10% and for job 102 is 20%. Job 101 is 10% and job 102 is 20%. So in that case, can anyone tell me what will be the cost of sales here for job 101? Selling price is 166,650, right? So 166,650 is 110%. And 128,250 is 120% because that includes the profit also. So if I say 166,650 divided by 110%, I'm getting 151,500. So I'm calculating the cost of sales for job 101. Guys, please let me know. Any doubts so far? So which gives us an equation here, 96,000 A plus 42,000 F plus 42,000 FA is 151,500 minus 96,000. So we're getting, please let me know. Is there any discrepancy, any thoughts till this point? Let me know, guys. All okay till this point? So this is based on job 101 only though. Please confirm. It's only based on the job 101. What are we looking at job 102 then? For job 102, again, we're saying that, okay, 30,000 plus 37,500, we had a 67,500 plus 30,000 into F. And my administrative cost is percentage of this itself. Multiplied by A, which is giving me the cost of sales. So 1,28,250 is including profits. Who will tell me? Who will tell me what is the amount of cost of sales for job 102? Please confirm. Unikrishan, I have mentioned the profit of 10% and 20% within the illustration. So if you look at your study material, your illustration 9, that number is given to you. That number is given to you. Okay, so 128, 250. So give me a quick second. That is something which is now clearly visible to you guys. No need to mention that here. Unikrishan, I hope that gets sorted because that was kind of hidden right slightly behind that text. Perfect. So based on this equation, Santos says 120 at 250 divided by 120%, we are getting 106,875 here. 106,875. That means we are looking at another equation based on job 102. We are saying that 67,500A plus 30,000F plus 30,000FA is what amount? Because we were having 1,06,875 minus 67,500 is 39,375 here. Are you guys with me on this till this point? Are we all getting these two equations together? If I look at these two equations, guys, if I look at these two equations, we can probably compare them and try to eliminate and bring it to a simple equation model. Any thoughts? What can we do? Any thoughts? What can we do? I can see this old mathematics trick helping us here. Old mathematics trick as in we can probably get to see that this is 42,000, this is 30,000. Can we multiply this equation by, let's say, 5 and this equation by 7 so that we get 210 here, 2,10,000. So if I do that, my equations will look like something like this. So if I'm doing that, you're getting 96,000. So our equations are, after multiplying them by 5 and 7 respectively, just let me know for any mathematical issues. Getting 277,500. And other one is 472,500A plus. So we are multiplying the second equation by 7 here. And we are getting 39375 as 275,625. Is everyone with me on this? Please double check something. Then says A is 0.25, F is 0.6. It has already solved this. Wow. Just give me a double check. Just give me a second, guys. Is everyone with me on this till this point, guys? So can we eliminate something to find the values of A and F here? Kiran is helping me. Kiran says A is 0.25, F is 0.6. Wait a second. I need some space, so let me make that space here. So we're saying A is, based on this equation, is 0.25, F is 0.6. Perfect. So if you're getting, everyone is getting A is 0.25 and F is 0.6, can we go ahead with the next part of the question here? Because the requirement of the question was calculation of the percentage of recovery rates, which I've just done. And then we're talking about calculation of the amount of the factory overheads and administrative overheads and the profit for each of the two jobs. So basically what we are looking at is now computation of both the jobs here, 101 and 102. So a lot of information is already with us, right? So a lot of information is already with us. So we are looking at the information which is given to us in terms of 54 and 42 is material and labor given to us. Similarly, we're looking at a 37,500 and 30,000, and you guys have just calculated that your factory overhead would be what, guys? 60% of the direct wages. So we're looking at a 60% here, 25,200 and 18,000. Run with me on this. So in nutshell, our factory cost will be, this seems to be a 1,21,200. This seems to be 85,500 here. And accordingly, my administrative overheads will be 25% of the factory cost. So that's where I would like your responses coming in. So 25%, 1,21,200. This should be simple. 30,300. What about this? 85,500, guys. 1,375. Is that what everyone getting? 21,375. So 151,500. I think these numbers are quite recognizable, right? I'm already getting a little excited here. If I look at the numbers, we already use these, right? So basically, it's a kind of a back calculation working here. So back calculation working very well. So 15,150 and 10,000 is 20%, right? 106,875 into 20%. So we're talking about 21,375. So don't you think ideally we already knew this? It's just that we are plotting the balancing figures here. We already knew this, right? So these numbers are not alien for us. The hard part we have already done. So we're looking at 128,250. So we have done already the hard part by solving those equations and getting the absorption rates. This is something pretty much easy. We already have the selling prices given to us. It's just that we are plotting into a form of a cost sheet, right? And accordingly, the last part of the requirement was, guys, job 103. The last part of this was job 103. So what was happening in job 103? We have a material and labor. So let's see who answers first. I want everyone to confirm the job 103 selling price to me based on these absorption dates. Let me know, guys. Any answers on the query panel? What is the selling price for job 103? 70,000 into 12.5%. We're getting so profit of 12.5%, right? So profit of 12.5% would be not 70,000. So 70,000 would be 87.5% if I'm not wrong. So we're getting 80,000 should be my selling price. So the profit would be the balancing figure. Is everyone with me on this? Guys, everyone clear on this? Please let me know if there are any doubts. This is a very important illustration. There have been questions on the same in the past attempts. Hmm. Thanks, Kiran. Okay, guys. One more thing I want to talk about, guys, if there are no doubts on this one, is apart from the factory overheads, remember by functionality, we discussed administrative and selling overhead also. So administrative overhead is nothing but the general management functions which are not directly related to the production or marketing. And the selling overhead, I already briefed you guys. Selling is for the purpose of selling the product and distributing for making available, right? So there are different treatments, but most of the times we are charging them to P&L, right? So we talk about that in terms of charging them because they're more not related to the production activities. But sometimes what happens is, guys, we are apportioning them as a different thought process. We can allocate them between the product and sales. But the idea here is at the end of the day, we are absolutely taking it to the cost of sales separately rather than charging it to the factory cost. We are not including that as a factory overhead. We are just including that as a separate element to be included in the cost of sales, right? And of course, the idea here is that, how do we allocate? Why do we consider these overhead? Because it's important to, like any other overhead, to keep them under check in comparison with the budgets, in comparison with the standards, to keep it under control. It's very, very important. Now, before we end, guys, I can see that we are already closing in. Let's try to quickly do one more question together. There are a lot of questions I've uploaded for your practice, guys. But I would like to quickly talk about one question here. So, which is this one on your screen. And I want your inputs, quick responses. We need to be really fast in solving this. Using Deccan Manufacturing have three departments, which are regarded as production departments here. Service department costs are distributed to these production departments using step ladder method, and estimates of factory overheads be incurred by each department. So data required is given to us, which is three production departments and four service departments here. And we're looking at overhead cost for the four service department are distributed in the same order, that is PQRS. So that is the order given to us. And the department's apportioned basis is also given to us. Number of employees, labor hours, area, and labor hours for PQRS. So we have to prepare a schedule showing the distribution of overhead cost for the four service department. That seems a very easy. But the second part is the calculation of the overhead rate per direct labor hour for each of the three production departments. Now they have given direct labor hours, but the prerequisite is that we have to allocate the service department cost. So how do we go about this, guys? So if you're looking at the factors given to us, what will be the order here? Order is given to us, right? So order is already given to us. So in terms of our allocation aspect, we need to be just kind of doing this step by step. This is step ladder, right? So first we go with the P. So first we go with the P then. So what will be my cost for department P? We are looking at factory overhead of 45,000. So you have to get rid of this 45,000. How do we allocate this, guys? Number of employees. So can anyone tell me what should be the ratio here for this? Now, this is important, guys. When I think the only reason I'm talking about this question is when you're apportioning, when you're reapportioning the service department overheads, make sure you exclude the factor of that department. So, if you're saying number of employees, then you do not consider the number of employees for P here. So we're saying 100, 125, 85, 50, 40, 50. So what is that? So we're quickly checking up. I think this is comes out to 450 here. That means 100 by 450 into 45,000 here. So that means we're looking at 10,000 going here. We are talking about taking another 12,500 going here. Ratio of 125. Then we're looking at 85 by 450. We're saying 8,500. I think this is simple maths. And similarly, other departments as well. 5,000, 4,000, and 5,000. Why I'm doing this so quickly here is because we already saw we are talking about 450 and 45,000. So 45,000 has to be allocated over the basis of 450. Now, when we go to the next department, department Q, my overheads for department Q is now 75,000 plus 5,000, 80, which is to be considered to direct labor hours. So I have a question for everyone. Which department hours we need not consider for allocating department Q? Which department hours we need not consider for allocating department Q, guys? Waiting for your answers. Semto says P. Semto, I would say, why not P and Q both? Are we considering labor hours for... Okay, I think P was a perfect answer. P was a perfect answer, but why don't we consider, like, we should not consider Q also, right? If I'm not wrong. So what we are actually doing here is, we are looking at only the 4,000, 3,000, 4,000, 6,000, and 3,000. So we are saying 4 is to 3 is to 4 is to 6 is to 3 because Q itself is being distributed, right? Is everyone with me on this? Guys, everyone with me on this? So that means if you're looking at 80,000 being distributed in this ratio, which means we are looking at 16,000 coming it to be product or department X here, 6,000, 8,000, 12,000, and 6,000 because we are having a base here of 4 is to 3 is to 4 is to 6 is to 3. The total is 20. That means we are looking at a 400 here or a multiplication factor, right? So we're looking at 80,000 divided by 20. So we're looking at a 4,000 based on the each ratio. So 4,000 into 4, 4,000 into 3 or accordingly. So we look at 16, I think that is 16 and 12, I guess. 16, 12, 16. And for the others, we are looking at 24 and 12, right? So 4,000 multiplied by the number of ratios. Is everyone with me on this? Any doubts on the department Q, guys? So what I'm trying to do here is we are including the overheads from the previous service department. That means first we allocated P. P is gone. It's a stepladder method. We go to the Q then. Now, once we allocated the Q department cost 16, 12, 16, 24, and 12, which I think comprises 80 now. So we are looking at a revised overhead of R now. What is the R overhead becomes? 1,05,000. P had a 4,000 here and Q has a portion 24,000 if I'm not wrong. So we are looking at R's overhead increased from original 1,05,000 to 1,33,000, my friends. 1,33,000. So we can allocate that based on the area, and now we'll not consider the area of P, Q, and R. Only the area of X, Y, Z, and S will be considered. I want a quick confirmation. Is the step ladder method clear to everyone? Is the step ladder method clear to everyone? Please confirm because this is important and I want you guys to do more practice after the session. Try to pick up more questions on the subject guide or your study material and also try to solve some questions from the previous attempts. Although I've already picked one or two questions from the previous attempt, I want you to do more practice, guys. Last confirmation for everyone. Any doubt on how do we go about this? How do we use the step ladder method, guys? Can you please confirm? Any doubts, please let me know. Let me know, guys. We are doing step by step. We are ensuring that we are allocating the each department cost here. P first, Q, R, S based on the given parameters. Just that we need to ensure that we have to ignore the apportionment of that factor of that department and the department which is already done. Okay, let me just quickly check before we wrap up the query panel here. Any doubts? Anyone? Unikrishnan, Sweetie, Pratima, over here, Sayanto. Perfect then. I think we can wrap up then in that case. So what we'll do, guys, is on Thursday, so we have ABC costing. So what I will do is I will cover ABC costing. We will probably link the two sessions. We'll consider how the traditional costing system has a drawback. So what we discussed today is the absorption rates. We have to see in machine hours, labor hour rates, other parameters, but I told you that most of them are volume driven drivers, guys. Problem with this traditional absorption system, when we say how do we take care of the overhead cost, we are using the absorption costing here, but this is more of a volume driven absorption rate. Sometimes what happens is there are overheads which may not be strictly driven with the with the volume itself. Let's say something like design cost or redesigning cost. Let's say there are 5 products and there are redesigning costs being incurred. And till now, what we have seen is maybe you guys will allocate the redesigning cost based on the machine hours or a labor hours. But what if what if out of the 5 products, the redesigning was majorly done for the 2 products and very negligibly involved for the other 3 products? That means chunk of the overhead in terms of the redesigning cost should be going only to those 2 products. That's where we will be bringing in a concept called activity-based costing, guys. For a better pricing, better costing, we will be considering this on Thursday. So I request you guys to go back, cover up this absorption costing, do some practice. If time permits, we may take up another question of this on Thursday session, but my major agenda will be ABC. In comparison, we will see, how the ABC is better than the traditional costing. So I'm sure then the overall picture will be much better for everyone. I hope it is clear, guys. So look forward for Thursday session, but there is a homework definitely. You guys are supposed to continue your hard work by doing more and more practice, guys. Okay, so have a nice day, my friends. Best of luck. Happy learning. See you soon. Cheers, guys.